The first thing that tipped me off was the dress. I was setting the table when I heard the front door click open. I glanced at the clock. 8:47 p.m. Almost 2 hours later than she'd said. Work ran late, she would say. Meetings, deadlines, you know how it is. I knew how it was. Except that, earlier that evening, one of her co-workers had called the house looking for her. "Is Olivia home yet?" he had asked, casual but confused. She left a little after 6. And now she stood in the doorway, keys in one hand, purse in the other, wearing a black dress I had never seen before. Not work attire. Not even close. The neckline dipped just enough, the fabric hugged just right, and the perfume. God, the perfume. It wasn't just the usual faint trace of vanilla and jasmine she dabbed on in the morning. It was fresh, thick in the air like she had reapplied it moments ago. Like she needed to. "You're late." I kept my voice even. She sighed, dropping her purse onto the counter. "Yeah. Sorry. You know how it is." I nodded, watching her from across the room. "Do I?" She walked over, pressing a kiss to my cheek, but it was quick, absent-minded. A habit more than anything else. "I'll just go change," she said, already heading down the hall. I followed. She didn't close the bedroom door. I lingered just outside the doorway, watching as she reached for the zipper at the back of her dress. The way she moved, the way she slid it down in one smooth motion, felt practiced. Familiar. The dress slipped from her shoulders, pooled at her feet. And that's when I saw it. Nothing. Just flawless skin in the dim light of the bedroom. My pulse pounded in my ears. My brain tried to reason through it. Maybe she wanted to be comfortable. Maybe she just forgot. But no. That wasn't Olivia. Olivia was careful, meticulous. She planned every outfit down to the earrings. I stood there, unmoving, my thoughts racing in circles. Why would she go to work like this? She wouldn't. She didn't. She picked up a pair of sweatpants from the bed and tugged them on. A t-shirt followed. She never noticed me. I returned to my seat at the table, waiting. The dinner had gone cold. When she sat down, she didn't sit next to me. She took the chair across from mine, eyes downcast, her fingers playing absently with the edge of her napkin. Normally, she would tell me about her day, ask about mine. Instead, silence. I studied her. She pushed food around her plate. Barely ate. Suddenly the phone next to her rang. She picked it up and went out, saying that it was a call from work. She had never left when she received a call from work before. And then, from the other room, a sound. A voice. Hers. Low, hushed. I got up quietly, stepping toward the hallway. "I'll explain later," she whispered. A pause. Then the soft, unmistakable click of a call ending. I stood there, staring at the darkened doorway, the phone still glowing faintly in her hand. Explain later? To who? She saw me standing there, phone in hand. "It was work," Olivia said, her voice even, almost bored. "I already told you." A lie, smooth and effortless. I didn't respond. Just turned, walked back to the table, sat down. She followed a few seconds later, slipping into her chair. We ate in silence. The knife scraped against my plate as I cut my food. She flinched at the sound. Or maybe I imagined it. "I'll be right back," she said suddenly, pushing back from the table. Bathroom. She left her phone. Right there. Right in front of me. I barely hesitated. My fingers closed around it before I could think too hard about what I was doing. The screen lit up at my touch. No passcode. She had never needed one. I swallowed, my chest tight, my pulse pounding as I opened her call log. The last incoming call was from an unknown number. No name. No contact. Just digits. I stared at the screen. I could almost hear her voice in my head. "I'll explain later." Explain what? I swiped to her messages. My breath caught. A conversation. Recent. The same unsigned number. I opened it. Unknown number missed you today. Olivia, you just saw me yesterday. Unknown number not enough. I scrolled. More messages. A lot more. Plans. Inside jokes. Subtle flirtations disguised as casual remarks. And then, unknown number tonight? Olivia, just for a little while. I stopped. The words blurred, my vision narrowing. Tonight. She hadn't been working late. She had been with someone else. I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind reeled, grasping for explanations, rationalizations. But there weren't any. I knew what I was looking at. I knew what I had seen in the bedroom. The dress. The perfume. The lack of anything beneath it. She hadn't come home from work. She had come home from him. I forced myself to exhale, steadying my grip before I crushed the damn phone. Every muscle in my body was tight, coiled like a wire ready to snap. The sink ran. Footsteps. I straightened, pushing the anger down, pressing it into something colder. Sharper. She stepped out, moving toward the table, toward me. Clueless. Carefree. She had no idea what was waiting for her. She barely looked at me as she sat back down, smoothing her hands over her lap like nothing had happened. I let the silence stretch. Let her settle in. Then I placed her phone on the table. Face up. Screen still glowing. Her messages were open. Her gaze flickered down to it, and I caught the moment of hesitation, the way her fingers twitched before she forced them still. Her face was blank, but her body gave her away. What is this? Her voice was light, casual. I didn't answer. Just watched her. She exhaled a small laugh, forced. Were you going through my phone? I tilted my head. She was stalling. Answer the question. My voice was quiet, deliberate. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Calculating. Then she sighed, shaking her head like she was exasperated instead of cornered. It's nothing, she said finally. It's just a friend. A friend. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. Which one? Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. You don't know him. Him. A slip. A small one. But enough. Her eyes darted to the phone again, her lips pressing into a thin line. I waited. She didn't touch it. You were with him tonight, I said. Not at work. She let out a breath through her nose, shifting in her chair. I told you I had to work late. No. You told me that after you had already left hours earlier. Her jaw tensed. I shook my head. So which is it, Olivia? Were you working late, or were you with him? She finally reached for the phone. I didn't let her take it. My hand closed around it first. Her expression didn't change, but I saw the way her muscles tightened, the way her nostrils flared ever so slightly. I don't have to explain my friendships to you, she said, voice sharper now. I laughed under my breath. Short. Bitter. Friendships. She crossed her arms. Yes. Friendships. Jesus, you're being ridiculous. Ridiculous. I sat back, gripping the edge of the table to keep myself still. You wore a dress I've never seen before. My voice was steady, even. Came home smelling like you just drenched yourself in perfume. You weren't wearing anything under that dress. Her face didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. I continued, my words deliberate. And now I find messages to some unsigned number, talking about missing each other, about meeting tonight. And you want me to believe I'm being ridiculous. She clenched her jaw, her knuckles white around her crossed arms. You're twisting things. Am I? Her silence was the answer. I felt something inside me settle. The ache in my chest wasn't shock anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was confirmation. She could have told me the truth. She could have said his name. She could have denied it in a way that mattered. But she didn't. She sat there, stiff, refusing to bend, refusing to give me anything. I let the weight of it sink in before I spoke again. Get out. Her head snapped up. What? You're going to leave, I said, standing. And you're not coming back until you tell me the truth. She scoffed, pushing back from the table. You're seriously kicking me out? I stared at her, at the way she squared her shoulders, the way she tried to look outraged instead of guilty. No, Olivia. You made that decision when you chose him over honesty. She glared at me, nostrils flaring. You don't just get to kick me out of my own house. It stopped being your house the second you started sneaking around like a goddamn stranger in it. That one hit. Her fingers twitched at her sides, but she recovered quickly, shaking her head. You're being paranoid. I took a slow step forward, closing the distance between us. Then tell me the truth. She hesitated. Just for a second. Just long enough. I exhaled through my nose, nodding to myself. That's what I thought. She turned abruptly, striding toward the counter where she had left her purse when she first walked in. She grabbed it, slinging it over her shoulder, then hesitated for the briefest moment. Then she turned back, heading toward the bedroom. I didn't move. Just listened. A minute later, she emerged with the black dress, the one she had arrived in, balled in her fist. She was going back to him. Something twisted inside me, but I didn't let it show. I just watched as she walked to the door, not looking at me, not saying a word. Her hand gripped the handle. Paused. Like she was waiting for me to stop her. I didn't. She clenched her jaw, then yanked the door open and walked out. The door clicked shut. I stayed there for a long moment, staring at the empty space where she had been. Then I exhaled, slow and steady, pressing my hands flat against the table. Now, all I had to do was wait. For the truth. Or for the moment I stopped needing it. The house was silent. Not the kind of silence that soothes you, the kind that settles in at night, wrapping around you like a familiar weight. No, this was the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like something had been ripped out of place and left a gaping hole behind. She was gone. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, expecting, hoping, to hear it open again. For her to walk back in, look me in the eye, and tell me everything. But she didn't. She wasn't coming back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. A slow breath left my lungs, but it didn't help. My body felt too tight. My skin stretched over something raw and simmering. I felt everything all at once. Anger, sadness, relief. A tangled mess of emotions, fighting for space in my head. I needed to move. I turned away from the door, walking through the house like I was seeing it for the first time. The dining table was still set. 2 plates, 2 glasses, her half-eaten meal sitting there like a bad joke. I picked up her plate and dumped it into the trash. Then the glass. Then the fork, the napkin she barely used, the tiny traces of her left behind. The wine bottle was still half full. I stared at it for a long moment before gripping the neck tightly. I almost poured myself a glass. Almost let it dull the weight pressing against my chest. Instead, I walked to the sink and emptied the bottle. The wine spiraled down the drain, disappearing faster than I expected. Just like her. I set the empty bottle on the counter and exhaled. Then I looked down at the object still sitting on the coffee table. Her phone. The screen was dark now, but I didn't need to turn it on to know what was in there. The messages. The proof. I grabbed it and held it for a moment, turning it over in my hands. I had no idea what I would do next. Maybe I'd get a lawyer. Maybe I'd confront her again when she came crawling back with another half-baked lie. Maybe I'd never see her again, and this phone would just become another object I eventually threw in a drawer, forgotten. I powered it off and placed it in the drawer of the coffee table. It would be there when I needed it. And I knew, eventually, I would need it. I sat down on the couch, leaning forward, resting my elbows on my knees. And for the first time all night, I let myself feel it. The betrayal. The humiliation. The deep, aching loss of something I had thought was unshakable. I had trusted her. I had built a life with her. And she had chosen someone else. The anger came first, sharp and hot. I wanted to punch something, to break something, to scream until my throat was raw. But right underneath the anger was the sadness, creeping in like an unwanted guest. Because no matter how much I hated what she had done, I still loved her. I squeezed my eyes shut. No, I couldn't think like that. Not anymore. I needed to move forward. I stood up, looking around the house. My house. It didn't feel like mine yet. Too many traces of her lingered in the air, in the furniture, in the tiny details that made it ours. I grabbed her jacket from where she had left it draped over the chair, folded it, set it by the door. Then I went to the bathroom. Her toothbrush, her perfume bottles, the half-used moisturizer she always kept on the sink. I scooped them up, one by one, and set them in a box. I wasn't throwing them away. Not yet. But I needed them gone. By the time I finished, the house felt different. Lighter. Still painful, still raw, but there was space now. Space for me. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. I could turn it on, drown everything out with noise, pretend I wasn't sitting in an empty house trying to convince myself I was okay. But instead I just sat there, thinking, breathing, existing. And for the first time since she walked out, I realized something. I was going to be okay. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. But soon. Because she had left. And I was still here. I changed the locks the next morning. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about control. Taking back what was mine, making sure I would never again feel that sinking sense of doubt every time the front door opened. The locksmith worked quickly, and by noon, my keys were the only ones that could unlock this house. My house. By the afternoon, I had called the bank and frozen our joint accounts. She'd get her share, but not before I knew exactly what belonged to me. I wasn't going to be the fool who let his wife cheat on him and then pay for it. And by evening, I had called a lawyer. Divorce. I said the word out loud after I hung up the phone, testing how it felt in my mouth. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. It just felt inevitable. She didn't come to pack her things. She called a removal service instead, and I stood by the window, arms crossed, watching as strangers walked in and out of my house, taking what was hers. Her clothes. Her books. It felt strange, watching pieces of her disappear without her ever stepping foot inside again. And yet, somehow, it felt right. I had already let her go. This was just the physical proof of it. By the time the last box was carried out, the house felt lighter. Not empty. Not broken. Just mine. She didn't fight it. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she just wanted it over with. Either way, she signed the papers without hesitation. The only surprise was that she brought him, the other man. At first, I thought he was a stranger. Just some guy she met at work, or a gym, or a coffee shop. But when my lawyer handed me some documents listing his information, his name hit me like a brick to the chest. Ryan Carter. It took me a second to place it, but then I remembered. College. She used to date him back when we were still students. Before me. He was the one who left her. The one she cried over in dorm rooms. The one she swore had ruined her faith in relationships. And now, after nearly a decade together, she had thrown everything away for a rerun. I glanced at him across the table. He was average. Brown hair. Sloppy posture. Wore a jacket that didn't fit right. The kind of man you settle for. He didn't look at me, and Olivia barely spoke. She signed her name, slid the papers back to my lawyer, and that was it. 9 years, reduced to a couple of signatures. She stood to leave, but for a brief moment her eyes met mine. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then she hesitated. And in that hesitation, I saw it. Regret. Not for what she did. Not for breaking my trust. But for the fact that I wasn't broken anymore. I was letting her go, and she knew it. So she turned away, walked out the door, and left me behind for good. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something deep in my chest. Peace. I thought moving on would be harder. But it wasn't. Not once. I stopped looking at my life as something she had ruined, and started seeing it as something I could rebuild. I reconnected with old friends. Friends I had drifted from because marriage made me comfortable. Friends who had been waiting for me to come back, who invited me out, pulled me back into the world. I went to the gym again. Not to impress anyone. Not to win the breakup. Just to feel good in my own skin. I picked up hobbies I had forgotten. I lived. And little by little, the past became just that. The past. She was a scar now. A faded reminder of what I had survived. One evening, months later, I stood in my kitchen, making dinner. The same kitchen where I had once sat, staring at a phone full of evidence, waiting for a woman who would never tell me the truth. But now, there was no waiting. No tension. Just me. And I was okay. No, I was better. As I poured a glass of wine, I glanced at my phone. A message from a friend. Dinner this Friday? I smiled. Typed out a response. Yeah, I'd love that. Then I took a deep breath, looking around my house, my life, and everything I had rebuilt. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt wide open. I was free. Do you think I did the right thing?